So welcome everyone. My name is Tom Solomon, and along with co-presenters Senator Ortiz-Pino and Dr. Sherry Kelly, we're going to be presenting tonight's webinar on geothermal heat and electricity and how to develop that in New Mexico. Senator Ortiz-Pino, would you like to do the introduction?
Yes, thank you very much, Tom, and thank you all for taking some time tonight to learn about our plans for trying to foster greater interest in and stimulate some actual development programs around geothermal energy in New Mexico. Coincidentally, this morning I was listening to KANW's 107 point, I think it's 107.5 alternative channel, the Albuquerque Public Schools channel, and there was a TED talk on geothermal energy this morning and the great potential that it has. That's how I got involved in the first place. I saw a TED talk somebody had sent me. I called Tom Solomon up. He said he was eager to learn all he could about it. So together we started meeting regularly and inviting in Dr. Kelly from New Mexico Tech. We invited in people from Sandia. We invited in people from New Mexico State University, Doctors Lavrova and Patricia Sullivan. Ultimately, we had a group that varied each week, but each time we met, but throughout the spring and summer, we met and finally decided in the summer that this was too good an opportunity to pass up, and that we really did need to move forward with some legislation. And we'll be talking about the specific legislation a little later on. But we found that geothermal, the potential for geothermal in New Mexico was so rich that we really believe this could be the last missing piece in making New Mexico 100% sustainable in terms of our electric energy generation. And if you add it to wind and solar, one of the great potentials it has is that it's available 24/7, 365. If the wind is not blowing and the sun isn't shining, geothermal will always be there. It's clean, and so it's absolutely something that we think the environmental community will want to be supportive of. And New Mexico is uniquely situated, and Dr. Kelly is going to go into some details about that, about why we are in a particularly favorable location for developing our geothermal resource here in the state. It is a resource that is in large measure in parts of the state where not a whole lot of other economic opportunities exist, and this could be a way to really break the cycle of poverty in our state. Finally, some of the more recent developments in this field could utilize the drilling rigs that have already been in place here in our state, and that as we move away from fossil fuel, those rigs will become available for drilling deeper wells that are needed for solar, for geothermal. And this is a way for the workers who now work in the oil and gas industry to continue to use some of those skills, but in a clean, sustainable industry. So the members of the work group that have been coming most often are myself and Tom Solomon, who's functioned as our facilitator and put us in touch with other researchers around the state, and with some businesses that are also developing projects here in the state. Senator Stewart and her Chief of Staff, Sanders Moore, have been regularly attending. Senator Souls has been with us numerous times. Former legislator Akil Abbas, who worked in, it turned out, geothermal when he was working for Sandia, or maybe it was when he was at PNM, I'm not sure which, but he's been very helpful. And then Dr. Kelly, who you're going to hear from next, or a little later, and then Doctors Lavrova and Sullivan from New Mexico State have all been regular partners in this working group. And so our goal really is to develop some legislation. We've been thinking about this in two phases. One, there's readily available geothermal resource right now. There are public buildings that use heat pumps the heat is generated from the ground source geothermal system constructed adjacent to or underneath the building, and then that fuels the heating and cooling system. So there's big school buildings in Rio Rancho and Albuquerque and some other locations that already utilize that source. We want to foster more of that. There are greenhouses, and there's one particular one down near Las Cruces that I think we'll be talking about a little bit that already has been using it and finds 95% of its heating costs have been reduced because they use the readily available heat from a hot springs. Then there's the potential for developing some of New Mexico's 27 or 28 hot springs as places where people can soak, can get the beneficial value from sitting in the mineral waters, or some have been developed into full-blown spas. But mostly in phase two, we're the other things that we could do, there's a tilapia farm down near Lordsburg that uses hot water readily available now through geothermal source. And there are possibilities for, drying chili, for drying nuts, all sorts of things. Wherever there's heat that's been involved in the production of something, maybe even drying and used in a kind of a kiln for adobes or bricks, things like that. But it's in phase two that we're most excited, because that's where we would have the possibility of using geothermal energy to generate electricity. And that could be the source for the final 10% to make New Mexico's grid fully clean.
Thank you, Senator. And next, we'll turn it over to Dr. Sherry Kelly from New Mexico Tech. Dr. Kelly is senior geophysicist with the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources with the state of New Mexico, and works at New Mexico Tech. And she's going to cover some of the geophysics of geothermal energy. Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Tom. So in this slide, we see a picture of the Earth, and the Earth gets hotter as you go towards the center. The source of the heat is left over from the formation of the planet. And more importantly, there are certain elements that are contained in rocks, uranium, thorium, and potassium, that are radioactive, and the radioactive decay generates heat. And so our heat engine is always on. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the results of a study that was done by the National Renewable Energy Lab. And as a consequence of this study, they feel that New Mexico ranks 6th in the country in terms of resource potential. The areas that are red are places where the potential is the highest. And if you look at it, kind of zoom in and look at the state of New Mexico, you notice that there's a kind of band of red that runs through the middle of the state. And then there's a fairly large area in the southwest part of the state that have elevated potential. And that that band is controlled by a very important geologic feature here in the state of New Mexico. Next slide, please. So that feature is called the Rio Grande Rift. The state of New Mexico is slowly spreading in an east-west direction. And a few years back, in the early 2000s, a group of researchers from New Mexico Tech and NMSU and other universities did a large seismic experiment across the rift. The map on the left shows the position of the seismic line, and the slide on the right shows the results from that large study. And you can see that the upper layer, the white layer with the little lines in it, is thinned under the Rio Grande Rift, and the hot mantle that is underneath has come up towards the surface, and so the heat from inside the earth is a bit, the elevated temperatures are a bit closer to the surface so that geothermal can be economically developed in our state. There's also some stretching that has occurred in the Basin and Range in southwest New Mexico. Next slide, please. So most of our systems are gravity-driven systems. We do have one volcanic resource up in the Jemez Mountains. In the southwest corner of the Valles Caldera, there was an eruption that occurred about 70,000 years ago, and the magma chamber that fed that eruption is cooling off at a depth of about 5 or 7 kilometers in the subsurface. And that's the reason there's all kinds of hot springs and so on down San Diego Canyon. Unfortunately, that resource is now in a national park and is currently not available to us. The remainder of the systems are similar to the little cartoon that is illustrated on this slide. It's called a gravity-driven system, and what happens is the rain falling on the mountains will percolate down deep into the earth, and it will be heated by that elevated heat flow related to the Rio Grande Rift. And sometimes it gets kind of stuck down there, and so it goes really, really deep until it encounters some fault, a geologic fault, where rocks are fractured, and the warmed water can come back up towards the surface and emerge as a warm spring or a hot spring. Now, sometimes that water can't find a way back up. That heated water can't find a way back up, and we get the development of what are called blind geothermal systems, and those are things that we have to use other tools to try to find them, usually geophysical tools. Right, next slide. And this slide shows the known geothermal systems in the state of New Mexico. So the map on the right has little triangles and that are hot springs, and orange circles, which are hot wells, places where people have drilled and encountered hot water, sometimes accidentally, sometimes on purpose. And you can see that most of our hot springs are along the Rio Grande Rift and in the southwest part of the state where extension has occurred. And what we do in these hot wells is we measure temperature as a function of depth. And the faster the temperature rises as a function of depth, we have what is called elevated geothermal gradients, and that means you don't have to drill as deep to get to the hot water. And the slide on the left is a study that was done by the U.S. Geological Survey that shows what the temperatures are like at depths of 3 kilometers. 3 kilometers is about 10,000 feet. And a lot of oil wells go to those kinds of depths. So we definitely have the technology to get to those depths. Now, sometimes those elevated temperatures are a little hard on the drilling rigs, and that's where a lot of the innovative technologies are starting to come in that Tom will talk about here in a little bit. But again, notice that these elevated temperatures are concentrated in the parts of the state that are experiencing extension, east-west stretching of the crust of New Mexico. All right, Tom.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. So I'm going to talk about some of the available resources in phase 1 and then phase 2, but starting with the existing known geothermal resources that we had. And Senator Ortiz-Pino talked about ground source heat pumps, and those are simply heat pumps that utilize the constant temperature at the near surface depths of say a deep basement. So under a building, you might dig a deep basement, lay pipe down in contact with the earth at depths of say 10 to 30 meters deep, and then circulate a fluid through those pipes in contact with the earth. It will become the same temperature as the earth, and then it comes up to the surface. And the temperatures we're talking about are maybe 55 degrees Fahrenheit or so. And so that provides a good opportunity for cooling in the summertime, but there's also plenty of heat in 55-degree water that can be extracted with the heat pump. And then that provides the opportunity to heat buildings in the wintertime. And those are probably best suited for large buildings where you can amortize the upfront costs of doing that drilling and installing all of that piping, and then spread those costs over a large structure, like, for example, an apartment complex or a large government building or a university dorm, for example, and we'll talk about that. That is ground source heat pumps, and there are quite a number of examples currently in existence today in New Mexico. The second we've already talked about are the hot springs or spas, and there are about 28 of them throughout New Mexico, as you saw on the previous map, kind of spreading along the Rio Grande Rift. And they are just places where there is hot water that bubbles up from underground up to the surface and provides people with nice opportunity to warm themselves in hot water. It'd be a great tourist attraction. Jemez Springs is an example. The third example in phase 1 is geothermal electricity development. And this is where you would find an existing underground geothermal hot water reservoir where there's a hot aquifer deep underground that's in contact with this hot rock. So it's already heated, and you would drill, for example, 2 wells. You would drill an extraction well, a production well, and then a reinjection well. And you would pump the fluid, the hot fluid, up to the surface, run it through a heat exchanger in an electricity power plant. And just like in any other gas-fired or coal-fired or nuclear power plant that uses those fuels to provide heat, you would generate electricity from that heat. But in this case, the heat is being supplied by the Earth's heat from the hot water that you extracted. And then after you've extracted that heat energy, it is re-injected back into that same reservoir, replacing what you pumped out the first time. And it heats back up again, and you have a continuous loop. And there are quite a number of these kinds of geothermal or hydrothermal electric power plants in operation today. There are many, many dozens of them in California and Nevada and Oregon and Idaho, in excess of 3 gigawatts of electricity production in the US today uses this style. And the costs of geothermal electricity generated with these kinds of plants is well known, and it is cost competitive with electricity generated from a natural gas plant. So it is significantly cheaper, for example, than nuclear or coal power, but not quite as cheap as solar and wind. But it has the advantage of being 24/7 constant power using existing hot water. And so they're great when you find them, but of course you need to be in a location where there is an underground hot water aquifer, and those are not all over the place. They are in a few select locations. There is certainly one in southern New Mexico near Lordsburg, and we'll talk about that. In New Mexico today, these are some examples of the main geothermal resources that have already been developed, starting with Mason Farms, which is the second largest geothermally heated greenhouse in the United States. It's a 20-acre plus geothermal greenhouse complex. It's in Radium Springs in Doña Ana County. And the owner of that complex, Alexander Mason, has said that he saves a good 93% on his heating bill by using geothermal heat from the wells that he's drilled, because no fuel costs. He doesn't have to pay for natural gas in a furnace. And it is one of the largest employers in Doña Ana County, employing about 200 people. And I think they are looking to expand. We talked about the Lightning Dock geothermal electric plant, the only one of that kind in New Mexico. It is a smallish geothermal electric power plant of 15 megawatts. It is in an area called Animas, just south of Lordsburg, and it provides some electricity to the P&M grid. There are, of course, 29 hot springs. I guess that's the number in New Mexico. Jemez Springs, Gila Hot Springs, Ojo Caliente. There's quite a number of them, and here is a map of some of the biggest ones spread all throughout New Mexico, reflecting what Dr. Kelly showed us earlier. And then ground source heat pumps, we already talked about. There are several known school facilities in Albuquerque Public Schools. The Visu Cleveland High School in Rio Rancho employs geothermal wells to heat their buildings. In downtown Albuquerque, the Sims office building is heated with ground source geothermal, and Alamogordo Public Schools also employ ground source heat pumps. And then in addition to that, I skipped over the Americulture Aquaculture Farm, also adjacent to the geothermal plant in Animas. And they use the hot water available there to heat up their aquaculture farm. They grow tilapia fingerlings to the size of your finger and then ship them to other fish farms throughout the United States. And it's a nice little business they have there. The Mason Farms, by the way, grows flowers, and they provide those to the El Paso flower market. And it's a nice, thriving business. This is a slide that I'll turn to Senator Ortiz-Pino to cover, and this is the ideas that we want to or have embedded in the Geothermal Resource Development Bill. Go ahead, Senator.
Good. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, we're actually proposing 3 separate bills this year, and the main one is the one that we're calling the Geothermal Resource Development Bill, and this is one that does several things. It would create a center of excellence at New Mexico Tech. Centers of excellence are ways in which research in a given field can be fostered and supported, could attract research grants from government, federal government, or from private industry or from foundations. There's many benefits to having a center of excellence. And in this case, both New Mexico Tech and New Mexico State have agreed to collaborate on one that would be basically housed at New Mexico Tech. So there's some money in our bill to foster that center of excellence at Tech. Second thing would be to beef up the state's capacity to oversee the development of geothermal resources. Right now, actually, there was some there is in place some pre-existing legislation. Senators Griggs and Representative Townsend passed the bill back in I think it was 2017 session, and that bill created the foundation for geothermal development in the state, but we haven't really backed it up with resources for the state's Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, where it's housed, to do much more than they have one staff person who's devoting 1/4 of his time to that work. We would like to add several positions to the department to begin fully pursuing some of the federal grant money that's available, to provide technical assistance to companies, to help with locating geothermal and the permitting and the licensing processes that have to go with that. So that we really need to have the capacity within state government to become the encourager and the facilitator for this industry, which could be so powerful. To help that industry along, we're proposing two separate funds. First, a $10 million geothermal grant fund, and the grants would be made to state entities, universities, to other departments of state government that might be pursuing federal money and need some matching funds, or that need to purchase some equipment. For example, the Center of Excellence might want to do some research and need some of these new high-speed, high-tech drills, and this would be a way for them to fund that activity. So the grant fund would be limited to governmental entities. The revolving loan fund, which we're requesting $15 million for, would be where projects that actually are going to be generating electricity, or they could be using existing geothermal technology to expand. They could apply for money to get started from that revolving loan fund. As they pay it back, the fund would be restored and would be available to additional businesses that want to get going. So the other thing that the State Geothermal Authority could do would be to provide the economic information about economic development incentives that would be available to foster this. We are proposing in a separate bill some tax incentives, and the authority would be able to help guide businesses into what it would take to qualify for those production tax credits. So we have two separate bills. One would be the Geothermal Resource Development Bill. The second one would be the tax credits. Senator Souls, incidentally, on his own, is pursuing a bill that he introduced last year that didn't pass, but he's going to try again, that would provide tax credits for ground source heat pump installation in residential and commercial buildings. And then we also have a memorial that we're planning, and the memorial would basically be encouraging any governmental construction project to at least consider the utilization of ground source heat pumps as they begin preparing for construction. That this could be something that school buildings, university buildings, any government building, state or local, might want to consider. We can't mandate it, but this would be a strong encouragement to take a look at the cost benefit factors involved in this. So that in a nutshell is what our legislative package looks like for this emerging new economic field.
Thank you, Senator. We've also identified a fair amount of federal funds that are available to apply for in the realm of geothermal, including a good $84 million for geothermal energy in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $500 million for clean energy demonstrations on current and former mine land, which include geothermal projects. There's a pending announcement of additional funding opportunities from the Department of Energy, including geothermal development. We'll wait to see what that is. And there is a very nice document that I just found that the administration has provided that they keep refreshing with geothermal and other renewable energy funding projects that we can apply for. And so having money and resources within ECMD to look for and apply for and be able to provide state matching funds for some of these federal funding opportunities would be really important to bring those funds and that economic development into our state. We've identified quite a number of potential further geothermal development opportunities in the course of our investigations, and there are 8 of them on this page. I'm just going to cover the top 3, but a few more of them are included in the backup slides if you want to look on your own later. But we're going to talk first about the study done by the Pueblo of Zia in conjunction with the Department of Energy. They did the study 2012 and 2013, looking for real renewable energy development opportunities throughout their Pueblo lands. And through the course of that study, they identified 4 potential geothermal development sites. Site number 1 was the best one here. And the idea would be some of the funds that we would provide through this bill, if it does pass, could provide some of the seed funding to further study and then apply for and proceed with developing this kind of a geothermal resource within the Pueblo of Zia. This next slide talks about a fascinating opportunity that is somewhat unique to geothermal, where you have some cascading benefits that can be realized by successive uses of the heat that you pump out of the earth. And this particular concept was put together with geothermal consultant Jim Witcher, and it happens to focus on the Mesa del Sol development just south of the Albuquerque airport, where deep underground, 13,000 feet or more, there may be some geothermal hot water available. And you could consider drilling a well down to that depth, perhaps pumping some of that water up to the surface to provide the power to run a 5 megawatt clean electricity geothermal electric plant. But then before you would re-inject that water back down into the aquifer from where it came, you could provide some cascading benefits at the surface for other geothermal hot water uses. For example, heating homes or businesses in the Mesa del Sol complex. That concept is called district heating, and it is done all over the world, including in Denver, and including most of the homes in the Iceland capital of Reykjavik. And the outflow water from a geothermal power plant still has plenty of heat to provide heating for homes and offices. And then in addition to that, you could use some of that continual low-grade heat to heat greenhouses or to dry chilies or onions or pistachios, making adobe, etc. And those kinds of applications are looking for temperatures in the range of 129 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which would still be available with that heat before you re-inject it. You could even use that outflow water to create a purpose-built hot springs for a tourism application. And that kind of thing is actually done in Iceland. A place called the Blue Lagoon is a huge tourist site for that country, and it attracts tourists looking to bathe in the healing waters, which are just an outflow from a local geothermal power plant. So these are 4 cascading benefits that you can consider using from just one set of wells in one location. At the New Mexico State University was a fascinating historical application of geothermal energy. And this was done starting in the 1970s, when they experienced this very significant increase in the cost of natural gas. And the state legislature provided some funding to NMSU to design and construct a series of geothermal projects on the NMSU campus. And they provided funding to drill think 4 different geothermal production wells, and that provided domestic hot water to provide space heating for their dorms, for their academic buildings, and their athletic facilities, including their Pan Am Center. They also provided heating for an geothermal aquaculture plant that I think was a precursor to the Americulture tilapia farm. And this was an early generation, early learning opportunity for how geothermal resources can be applied. One of the things that they learned was that the dissolved solids in some of that geothermal water that you bring up from the earth can actually deposit out on the piping and in the places where you're pumping it throughout the network. And over time, that actually caused the system to slowly become less effective. And all of those wells were decommissioned by 2015. We now know that you need to provide some filtration if you're going to use a geothermal hot water in that way. And a new application to geothermal development at NMSU would certainly take advantage of those learnings. And that is a development opportunity. In phase 2, remember we talked that we would look at developing geothermal resources in 2 phases. Phase 1 being the existing known geothermal resources, phase 2 being advanced geothermal electricity generation. And one of the companies that we've been working with is called Ever. And that particular cartoon on the right-hand side comes from their website. We believe that advanced geothermal electricity could provide the last 10% of the clean energy transition for the state. Opportunities on the order of 1 to 3 gigawatts of advanced electricity generation in the next decade, into the 2030s, I think appear before us. But to do that, there are 2 significant technology problems that have to be solved, and they are being worked on right now, including by Ever. The first is to design drill bits that can survive those much higher temperatures that you reach as you drill down to those depths, because you're literally looking for very hot rock. So you have to drill into much hotter rock than the current drilling technology is designed to do, which is to search for oil. We're going much deeper than that. And the second problem is to drill through the much harder rocks that you need to go into to find that kind of heat. We're talking about rocks that are like granite. So instead of softer sedimentary rocks, this is much harder rock. And of course, the drill bits don't proceed as quickly through that rock, and it's a little harder to do it economically. So they're working on solving those 2 technology problems. And that's why we're looking at somewhat down the road to do this kind of development. But were it to happen, this is what it might turn into. This again is some slides and graphics from Ever. And what you would consider doing is building an electricity power plant at the surface, drilling a set of parallel vertical wells down deep into that hot rock, use the known horizontal drilling technology that the oil industry has developed, drill these radiator fans at the subsurface, connect them at their tips so that the fluid that you pump down from the surface goes through these radiator fans, absorbing the Earth's heat, and then recirculate back up to the surface after it's gotten really hot. And then at the surface, you run it through a heat exchanger and generate electricity in a power turbine, just as you would with any other source of heat. And the advantage of this concept is that you're not using up any underground hot water. You're not bringing hot water to the surface with a lot of dissolved solids in it, because you're basically just drilling encased horizontal wells that you created yourself. You provide your own fluid, it circulates and brings the heat in a closed loop to the surface. So you're not really using a significant amount of water because it is in a closed loop, and it just goes, it's recirculating, and that's how it generates electricity. So it has many advantages if you can get this to work. And one of the advantages is you can consider doing it nearly anywhere on the surface of the earth if you can drill that deep and place the plant at the surface, which means you could also place one of these electricity generating plants close to the load, for example, a small city, and avoid having to build the transmission lines to transmit the power from the generation facility to the users within the city, because it could be just on the outskirts. That solves one of the significant problems that's preventing the clean energy transmission, which is the lack of transmission lines. We've also worked with Sandia Labs. Sandia Labs has a geothermal research facility right here in Albuquerque, and they do computational modeling. They have a hard rock drilling facility. They do energy simulations. One of the applications is actually using lasers or pulsed energy to pulverize the rock ahead of the drilling bit. Our team, Senator Tweezy Pino in particular, met with Sandia Labs and their geothermal researchers earlier in the summer. They're very interested in working with us, and of course, having that research facility right here in our state provides us a leg up in terms of developing geothermal research in the state, and having businesses wanting to come and do their work here. We've identified a handful of top geothermal energy startups, and we have spoken to two of them, Fervo Energy and Ever, and they are both reasonably well funded and building demonstration projects. And I will talk about Ever's demonstration project shortly here in New Mexico. And this is what it is. It is called Ever Deep, and this is literally an actual picture of their geothermal drilling well, which they just finished doing. They sited this well adjacent to the Lightning Dock power plant near Lordsburg, and they drilled a vertical well down in excess of 18,000 feet under the surface. And they drilled two test well loops close to vertical, but about 10 degrees off of vertical. It was the beginnings of what might become a radiator fan like this. But this was their first attempt to drill that deep into the subsurface, and they learned a lot by doing it. They consider the demonstration project quite a success, and they are looking forward to continuing that work in the United States and potentially here in New Mexico. So to bring us home and get us to the questions and answers, in summary, New Mexico is number 6 in the nation in terms of the potential for developing geothermal resources. It is clean energy for both heat and electricity development, and we believe a worthy target for investment for sustainable economic development in the state. It has the opportunity to leverage the skills and the equipment, literally the drilling rigs, used in the oil industry. And as we transition to a future clean energy economy, provides a just transition path for the workers in the oil industry. Well over $500 million in federal funding to apply for, to bring some of that into our state. And as the senator said, we'll be introducing a suite of bills to develop geothermal energy in the state, and we'd really love to have your support to pass that set of bills in the state. So we're going to transition over to the questions and answer period right now, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And let's take a look in the chat and see what kinds of questions have been developed already. Jim, are you online? If not, I'll cover the questions that we have, and then we'll turn to the audience. So let's see. The first question was, where in Rio Rancho is that ground source heat pump used? And it's the Visu Cleveland High School.
There was an even earlier question about reusing the abandoned oil and gas wells.
Okay, can we reuse the 35,000 abandoned oil and gas wells for geothermal? Dr. Kelly, maybe I'll turn to you to see if you want to make a stab at that question.
Sure. A lot of the wells in northern New Mexico are either being used to produce oil and gas, and or when they're stopped being used, they're plugged and abandoned. So it would take some effort to revitalize them. I am working with a small operator in southeastern San Juan Basin, who has an oil well that is producing a very small amount of oil and lots of very, very warm water, about 70 degrees C, not quite hot enough to do electricity, but enough to potentially heat a greenhouse. And so we are in the process of seeking funding to try to develop a demonstration project to show that it can be done. And there are other places in Oklahoma. There's places in South Texas where they actually, you co-produce water with oil. And in some instances, in Texas, they were able to use the heat from the water to run a very modular small power plant that ran the pumps on the wells. So yes, there is research along those lines.
Thank you, Sherry. So let's see, additional questions from Melissa. Geothermal subject to hazardous waste or radiological waste regulations to deal with norm that drilling brings to the surface? And my guess is yes, but Sherry, you might know better than I.
Well, it used to be that geothermal wells were regulated under the Oil Conservation Division rules, and then it got transferred to the I can never remember what the
Energy, mineral, natural resources.
Energy and Minerals Division. But and the guy that runs it, Darren Zigich, is an oil and gas guy, and so yes, they are very much regulated.
Okay. And there's a question about some of the funding going to EJ communities that want to participate. So it turns out that in the federal matching funds, there are provisions that give you a better chance of getting the matching funds if you provide the funding preferentially to EJ communities in some ways. And so we would certainly be motivated just because of that to provide some of those funds to the EJ communities. I don't know that we need to build it in at the state level because we hope to leverage a lot of federal funds, but it's a question to consider and be up to the senator to decide whether that's a worthy amendment. You want to make a comment, Senator?
Yeah, Tom, there is a federal Justice 40 initiative that basically says that up to 40% of any of these big federal environmental projects should be targeted to populations that have in the past been adversely affected by climate change, by pollution, by things like abandoned wells and so on. So I think that any of these monies that we would obtain would be subject to that same restriction. For up to 40% of it has to go for environmental justice projects.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
I noticed Kevin has a question. Maybe we could get his.
Sure, Kevin, you'd like to ask? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just unmuted. Thank you for taking the question. So I know that it's other legislators that are putting in the other two bills, Senator, I think it is Souls, and I don't know the other one, for tax breaks or tax credits, it's clearly spelled out. You clearly spelled it out in this presentation in terms of funding for the kinds of things you want to do the Development Act. Do you know what types of tax breaks specifically they will be looking for in those other bills?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, the bill we're writing, and it hasn't been introduced yet, but it's getting close to being ready to be introduced, has a gross receipts tax exemption for the state share of the gross receipts tax for construction and drilling costs associated with a geothermal project that's approved by the State Geothermal Authority. And then there's a production tax credit that's modeled on the one that is in place now for solar and wind energy that's based on a kilowatt hour tax credit. We're capping it. We're still struggling with how big a tax credit to permit for an individual project, and then for the overall hit on the state's budget from giving up so much. And right now we're looking at probably no more than a $10 million annual overall hit cap on tax credits, and it would be on a first come, first serve. But then we would also limit the tax credits to no more than 5 million for any given project.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, Kevin, I think Senator Ortiz-Pino is likely also to be the sponsor of the tax bill. Is that fair to say, Senator?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
And Senator Soules is sponsoring the heat pump, ground source heat pump bill, and then there will be this memorial to encourage state building developers to use ground source heat pumps.
Got it.
So let's see what else we have.
There was a question about water.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I'll make a suggestion about water, and then we can, Dr. Kelly, you can say. So it depends. I think it depends on what kind of geothermal electricity you develop, and certainly hot springs and spas, use some of the water. It evaporates at the surface when it comes up. With existing hydrothermal power plants of the style of lightning dock, there may be some evaporation at the surface through kind of the loss of heat from that resource, but almost all of that water that is pumped up from underground is then returned back to the same reservoir underground and re-injected. So it's not actual consumption of very much water. If you develop a closed loop system like Ever is talking about, you would, initially charge that series of underground pipes with an initial charge of some amount of water, but then it wouldn't evaporate. You wouldn't be using up any additional water. I would also say that the kinds of power plants that you'd be displacing as we move towards a clean energy transition end up displacing very major water users. So some of the biggest users of water in the state are thermal power plants like coal-fired and natural gas-fired power plants. They use a tremendous amount of water in cooling, and that just goes up into the air. And so as those plants close down and you were to replace them with solar and wind and these closed loop geothermal systems, you would end up with quite a net benefit in reducing the amount of water used in the state. So that is my perspective on the answer. Dr. Kelly, you could correct me if I got it.
You're right in that most of the power plants that are in use today are called binary power plants, where the water is pumped towards or down into the ground. It gets heated and then it comes back out hot, and it's basically in a closed loop, and it never really interacts with the air, because if it interacts with the air, that's when you start getting the precipitation problem that happened at NMSU. So there, on one level, you've got the geothermal water going like this, and then you've got another pipe that's in close proximity to the hot water that contains a different fluid that's got a boiling point that's less than the boiling point of water. It's called a working fluid, and it's usually an organic based material, and it continues around in a loop. And so the water that in a perfect world, then the water that is coming out of the ground goes back in and just keeps going around and around. Now, rocks are fractured, and sometimes some of the water kind of gets away from us, but it's down in the ground, but it doesn't really keep going around in the loop. And that's the beauty of these experiments with these closed loop systems.
All right, thank you. Let's see. So I think we addressed a number of those. Sarah Manning, you've had your hand up. And Kevin, do you still have your hand up for a new question, or is that a good thing? Okay, so Sarah, why don't you proceed?
Thank you. I'm finding this very exciting, and I just want to say that back in the 70s, when my late husband was in architecture school, this was one of the things that they were really excited about. However, we've identified a couple of known problems, and I'm categorizing 3 of them as sort of, we'll get to it, we'll figure it out. And those 3 would be drill bits surviving the hot temperature. We can deal with that. Drilling through harder rocks. Yeah, we're going to figure that out. And, you know, the filtration issues of water, but it's got so much stuff in it that it may corrode pipes. And yeah, we'll deal with that. So I'm not worried about those 2. But there is an issue that I'm not sure that we've resolved, and I would like to be informed that we have, and that is what happens in our experience of fracking and other drilling issues is the ability to pump water, in our case, back into the ground and not being able to control where the water goes. And I know that was a problem with lightning rock, and I hope they've solved that problem. We know that in places like the middle of the continent, you pump fracked water back into Missouri and the rest of it, you get earthquakes just because it's a different system. What is the science that allows us to be reasonably sure that when we pump back water of any nature back into the ground, that we can control where it goes?
Well, reservoir management has to be done carefully, and being, you know, lessons learned. When they were pumping like crazy in Oklahoma, they're pumping like crazy down in the Permian Basin, and lo and behold, they're getting earthquakes. You've got to, you know, you've got to control the injection. Now, in the case of geothermal, you don't want to over inject because you've got to balance the heat. If you run the thing too fast, you'll sweep the heat out of the system and you'll kill your system. So if you want your geothermal reservoir to work, you've got to do the math. You've got to do some modeling. You've got to figure out what flow rates will work and those kinds of things. Again, that's the reason I'm really kind of intrigued by this ever loop, Yeah, they've got one that's fully going up in Canada, and they've supposedly been collecting data, and it's not showing any signs of much change. It's not. They're in the Canadian Shield, and the temperatures are kind of cold, but they're not sweeping heat out of the system. The experiment that they did here in New Mexico, they drilled one, as Tom mentioned, one leg down 18,000 feet, and then they were trying to figure out how to do the radiator, and so they drilled another one, and they have some kind of sensors on the drill bits that allowed them to and these oil and gas. It was an oil and gas rig that drilled the wells, and those guys were able to connect the two wells or two legs with success. The technology that they were using was basically it was a rig that came in from the Permian Basin, and those guys know how to drill wells. And so this is, to me, I'm kind of excited.
I do have a follow-up question, if you don't mind. And that is,
let me just provide an additional answer to what I think Sherry just mentioned, which is my understanding of the primary reason why you get earthquakes with re-injecting water is that you're injecting water into a zone that is different from where you extracted any fluid, right? They're re-injecting water into an underground well, and it just pressurizes that underground area, and the pressure builds up, and as you might expect, it creates some fractures deep underground. With a geothermal reservoir, you're first extracting fluid, so you're basically pulling water under the ground, creating, think of it, space, and then it circulates up to the surface, and then you re-inject it back into and fill the space that you removed it from. So you're not pressurizing an underground system if you're, as Dr. Kelly mentioned, managing the reservoir properly. So if you are in fact pulling water out from underground from the same reservoir that you're pumping it back into, then there is no pressurization happening underground that builds up to cause those earthquakes. And that is an important thing to use to separate what geothermal is all about from the problems that may have happened with fracking.